Hi, Tina Peters here.
See, today they go after you if you're investigating that sort of thing.
Hello, Untamed Nation. Dave Clements here. I'll be filling in for Tina Peters. Great news dropped just a couple of days ago where the Department of Justice issued a statement of interest. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of that statement of interest. But I haven't seen y'all in a while. I haven't been able to join my brother from another mother on Joe Altman's show. And it's because I've been tied up. And I've been tied up in large part because of my last jail visit with Tina Peters. And so one of the things I've been dealing with is a sixth investigation launched by the disciplinary board of the Supreme Court of New Mexico. This time for the claim is that I was guilty of professional misconduct by visiting Tina Peters under quote unquote false pretenses. Now, there was no false pretenses. Let me just tell you that right now, get that out of the way. But the person that filed the complaint against me happens to be a guy by the name of Trent Toulouse. And if that name sounds familiar, Trent is the close family relation of Secretary of State of New Mexico, Maggie Toulouse Oliver. And this isn't the first time that Trent Toulouse has filed a complaint against yours truly. In fact, he filed one several years ago when I started in this whole movement. As soon as I basically took my feet off of the stage at the Cyber Symposium in 2021, a complaint was filed and a series of investigations were launched against me. And so, Mr. Producer, bring up the draft copy of my response. This has been brought to the attention of the state bar. I've been basically having to provide this, and I want to read this to you. Regarding the second complaint filed by Trent Toulouse. The complaint filed by Mr. Toulouse marks the sixth disciplinary complaint received by this tribunal over the past 4 years concerning the undersigned's advocacy for free and fair elections and opposition to the mandatory mRNA COVID-19 experimental drug disguised as a vaccine. I suppose that cannot be helped. I'm a public figure and will continue to receive scrutiny, whether it is deserved or not. What can be helped, however, is the degree to which this tribunal enables abuse of the disciplinary process by radical, far-left political operatives. From demands to produce 5,000 legal documents, to dragging me through an investigation related to a complaint filed by an occultist that published tarot card readings predicting my impending fall and insanity, to political operatives using the tribunal's largely false advisory opinions on election fraud to slander me on social media, the disciplinary board screening process needs major reform. And so what you all need to know is before this even happened, the last complaint I issued and found a series of conflicts with the tribunal that came after me. When I learned that many of these political operatives were corresponding and sending emails to the investigators weeks in advance before a complaint was filed. So they were working behind the scenes. This is not legal. This is not ethical. It's not right. Yet it happened. So I had to address in the investigation, just to start with, all of the correspondence that I marked in the last complaint, in the last investigation, because the people that are sending me the letter that's marked confidential is signed off by the same people that were supposed to have been conflicted out in the last investigation, if that makes sense. That didn't happen. In fact, the last investigation, which involved this occultist that we took screenshots of tarot card readings and all kinds of crazy stuff, they just went away. They didn't give me any formal resolution. which means for years I've had the black cloud over my license that I'm still, quote unquote, under investigation, which requires me to inform people. Yeah, if you want to take me on as your attorney, I have to let you know I'm under investigation. So whether or not there's any merit to the latest complaint, the latest investigation, the punishment is in the process. And political operatives have figured that out. So this investigation, I'm worried about it. Let me just say that right now. The basis for me getting into the Fort Collins jail to visit Tina checked with all of the provisions. There's no prohibition from me taking my iPad in there, doing a video recorded statement. In fact, anyone from home can do a video visitation with an inmate, and there's no prohibition on screen capture, publishing that. The fact is that they don't really deal with this type of issue very often because most people aren't Tina Peters. They don't have the level of visibility that she does. And so I wanted to bring awareness to her condition. I was able to go in as a barred attorney and did everything by the book. Submitted my bar card to the deputy. He ran a background check, screened me, let him know who Tina's attorney of record was, checked all of the rules and regulations. And when you meet with Tina, you're in basically floor to ceiling, a room with floor to ceiling windows. So everyone can see what's going on in there. I'm sure it's under recorded surveillance. So there was no getting access under false pretenses. Where Mr. Toulouse was trying to get me in trouble is that if I didn't volunteer, that by the way, I'm going to go in there, I'm going to record this video, it's going to go viral, and I don't disclose that somehow that's a form of deception. And what people need to realize is I didn't have an agenda going in. In fact, I visited with Tina for a couple of hours. The video in question is less than 9 minutes long. And I'm very careful. In fact, I even told Tina, hey, do you want to talk to people? Do you want me to put out an update from you? And I warned her, this might affect my ability to come see you again if the jail wants to retaliate against you. And I can't guarantee you that if you tell people your conditions that they're not going to hold it against you. Well, there was a kerfuffle a few weeks ago. I don't know if she was actually put in solitary confinement, but there was messages that she was retaliated against. And this was the basis for the writ of habeas corpus that was just filed by our attorneys. We announced that, I think, the day before we did the kind of Tina-a-thon a few weeks ago. And now we're at the place where, wouldn't you know, the statement of interest filed by the Department of Justice is on the books. So with all this to say, there's a couple things that I want to draw your attention to. So, Mr. Producer, if you'll bring the complaint to page 4, you're going to see a picture of Mr. Toulouse. And he's going to be right next to his family member, Maggie Toulouse Oliver. All right, so take a look and go ahead and blow it up. Go full screen on this. Because I want you to know the type of person that this guy is. Trent Toulouse is a psychology professor at a New Mexico community college and runs a radical left website called Rational Wiki, which is owned and run by the Rational Media Foundation, RMF. It works on the standard Wikipedia format where they let anyone edit, at least we think in theory. When you take a look at the board of trustees for RMF, you'll find that Trent Toulouse is the operations manager. So go ahead and scroll down to this page. And when you take a quick look at Rational Wiki's X page, you can locate post, get this, sympathetic to pedophilia, with one advocating that the age of consent to engage in sexual intercourse with an adult be lowered to 14. So go ahead and scroll down to the next page. And when I looked at their website, you'll find there's links to Mike Lindell. You'll find pictures of me in the WikiLeaks chat. And if you scroll down a little further, here's proof of that post saying that the age of consent should be lowered to 14. Okay, so bring it back to me. This has since been purged. This has been taken down, but I got all kinds of great stuff on this guy. So these are the types of unhinged operatives that have used the process to keep me under investigation effectively without end over almost a 4-year period. And that's what I've been doing over the past few weeks. So if you haven't seen me, I've been trying to defend what's left of my name. The article, maybe I can encourage Apollo to put it somewhere where people can grab it. But that's what I've been doing. So no good deed, even the visitation of a 69-year-old Gold Star mother who is a hero, goes unpunished. I'll get through this. And what I want to re-impress upon everyone that's watching this is that these are the actions of a defeated, desperate, dying regime that's flailing about. So I'm not worried in the slightest that I've got to go through this garbage, but it is time consuming. It does affect my practice, and it is what it is. But that's what I've been up to. So, but that's not the basis for this show. I have a very, very special guest. I know him as Fire Chief Frank, and I became aware of Frank. I don't know, it might have been through the Prisoner's Record prayer, but at some point I was touring through the state of Montana, and Frank had relocated from, I want to say Seattle, Washington, where he was active, and he was fighting against the COVID mandates. But he also has another story, which is he's also a J6er. And so when I met him for the first time, when he relocated to Montana, he was under house confinement, couldn't leave the house because of conditions of release that were imposed upon him. And we struck up a conversation. He's got a super compelling story, and I think he can speak for our first responders in a way that I'm sure many of them can identify with on the COVID front. And of course, there's at least 1,500 J6ers that have been treated so poorly. So with that, Frank Dahlquist, welcome to The Truth Matters with Tina Peters.
Good evening. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it, Professor.
Hey, Frank. So I want to turn the story over to you and just walk us through, Frank, prior to 2020, the obstacles that faced as a first responder, because there's been victories along the ways, but there's also been a series of setbacks. So I'm going to turn it over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself right around March of 2020.
Sure. I was a 15-year firefighter, fire captain with a department in King County, just outside the city of Seattle. We were one of the first ones in the United States to see COVID hit our shores. And so the same nurses that were in that first nursing home in Kirkland, Washington, were in our first due area that we were responding to. So the impacts of COVID, in our community, we felt almost immediately. That was leading into a contentious election. And I think that was part of the eye-opening that a lot of the firefighters that I was working with began to see. Another member and I that work really closely together kind of saw it coming before it hit our shores, and knew there was something different about this, and started to kind of tip off our administration that we needed to prepare as a potential pandemic. And then the response that we saw in the next year was so overwhelming in its new totalitarian ways, specifically in Washington State. It was just something that you couldn't ignore, that this was kind of a planned event. What we ended up seeing was my church being closed and not being able to reopen. We could have pot shops and strip clubs open, but my church couldn't be open. It's just kind of those impacts that we saw in our community that just didn't make sense. And so when the vaccine became available to the first responders, almost immediately, my fire chief at the time was going to mandate this within really the first month of the experimental shot being available to us. And so we were able to push back and said, that you can't mandate to us. This is still under experimental rules. And so what we ended up seeing as first responders was the impact to our elderly community first. Members that shouldn't have been getting sick because they were quarantined for almost a year at that point, were not getting exposed to anything, would be reporting of an unexplained illness weeks after getting the first shot. And then about 4 weeks after the second, we started to see the cardiovascular issues, the blood clots, the strokes. I had like a 38-year-old male that had no previous history that all of a sudden was having a stroke, and that's just unexplained. I had another ultra marathon runner, very young female, very healthy, get a couple miles into a run and just says, "Hey, I don't feel right. I have chest pain." And so those things started to add up over time. And so, the members that saw that stuff just couldn't ignore it any longer. And so when the shot was then approved, quote unquote, from our FDA in that fall, it was then mandated to us in the state of Washington by the governor under an emergency declaration and a proclamation that was temporary in nature. And our fire chiefs around King County area in Seattle decided to kind of collude within their organizations and basically told us before the exemption process even started, that there would be no accommodations. We had a vax or fire, and that was it. Our jobs would be terminated. My agency lost.
Frank, let me
Yes,
stop you right there. So,
you bet.
because you're laying it out beautifully. But there's a question that I have to ask you, which is, there's lots of people that just rolled over, said, "Look, I've gotten a vaccine before, quote unquote. I'm buying the propaganda that this is a loving thing to do." And yet early on, your intuition on some level was saying, "Mayday, Mayday, red alert." And you actually took a leadership role. And so correct me if I'm wrong, was there a union that you worked through as part of this process to stand up? Because at some point, look, the governor's saying you got to do it. You obviously kept fighting the good fight. So were there certain things that you were processing? Because I know from our discussion in your kitchen, because you made a wonderful breakfast for me, you having kind of a supernatural experience early on seeing some stuff that obviously there's a call on you to be a protector, whether it's responding to crash scenes, and that protective instinct. It's almost as if you just jumped right into it. Consequences be damned. So, what were the spidey senses that were going off for you? Because it's easy right now in 2025 to look back and say, "Yeah, it's all garbage," but there was a concerted operation, a psyop, to confuse people, to lie to them, and it didn't matter if you found scientists like a Malone or McCulloch or the founder of the PCR test. You just get shouted down, and it's not our scientists. So walk us through that. What makes Frank a little bit different in the way that you were seeing the world back then?
Well, how I became a firefighter, and that's kind of where it started. I wasn't probably walking the closest walk with Christ, but ultimately I knew, God existed and He was my Savior. And, I was actually trying to become a police officer, and that door continued to close. With lots of training, criminal justice degree, those kinds of things, kept on testing very well and not just getting through the process. When I decided to test as a firefighter, just to add it to the resume, I realized it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And really, it was God opening that door. And there was an incident when I was a really young firefighter with just limited training. My wife and I were traveling down I-5 just north of Seattle, and there was a number of crossover accidents that had happened that summer without a barrier, basically cars crossing the median and going into oncoming traffic. Well, as my wife and I were traveling, my wife was about 7 months pregnant at that point with our first child. And, God just put it on my heart while I was just kind of driving autonomically down the road to be ready. And I didn't really know what that meant at the time, other than I just had this sense that an accident was going to happen. And I said, well, I don't even know where I'm at this point. And I was at milepost 222. And through the next 60 seconds, I went through this whole scenario about how I was going to respond, how I would get other people to help in this incident. And at milepost 221, it just happened. I literally pulled up behind some red brake lights in front of me, and the dust was still in the air. And this car with a family of 5 had the roof ripped off of the car, almost like firefighters had done extrication on it and cut the roof off. And another vehicle was down the road in the opposite lanes of traffic. I couldn't really quite see it. And so I pulled up on the shoulder, got as close as I could, got into my trunk, grabbed my fire department first aid kit that they had supplied to us, and walked up to this scene that I had never experienced before. And I got to be honest, without just choking up a little bit, like, it was God's hand on me that day. We had one child that was crying on the ground outside the vehicle, and I just asked one of the people to kind of, take care of that person and just kind of keep them calm. And when I assessed the 4 other patients that were inside the car, there was 2 with agonal respirations. One child was crumpled into the back of the car that was deceased. Another one that was unconscious. And when I called 911, I knew the milepost number. It was exactly what God had placed on my heart. And I called in 1 deceased patient and 3 red. And one of the other persons that were there with me said, "Hey, there's another person just down the road that's passed away." And that person actually had been ejected from their vehicle and unfortunately ran over by a bus that was coming down the highway. I updated it with 2 deceased patients and 2 red. I asked for additional resources, asked for our Metaflight to come in for helicopter Metaflight. And I took care of that scene as I had done it many times before. And at the end of this, when other resources that were there got on scene, I kind of stepped back, and a battalion chief and a medic was assessing the remaining patients that were in there. And the chief asked the medic, "Are you going to call it?" And the medic says, "Yeah, I'm going to call it." And a firefighter placed a blanket over the back of the car. And from behind them, I knew that patient in the middle was still alive. I had checked; they had a pulse; they were just unconscious. And I stepped forward and said, "Hey, that patient is still alive." And right as I said that, the hand came out from underneath the blanket. I just believe that was God, being on that child's side that night, that day, and just being able to respond and stay engaged. And unfortunately, one of multiple of those people had died, but I think it was just God's hand on me that day to be there and ultimately to be ready. And that's what I found moving forward in my whole career. I got baptized in my fire department uniform in the river with my church. I decided if I was going to take that leadership role and be promoted, that I was going to do it the right way. And that was in Christ. And so I got baptized in my uniform. I promoted and got number 1 on the list and got promoted. I did the same thing when I went for captain and decided, hey, if you want me to be captain and lead in a new way, I was going to give it to you. And God did, and I tested and received number 1 on the list. But right as COVID was happening, and we knew the vaccine was going to come out and be mandated to us, I had an opportunity to test for battalion chief, and I prayed again on it, but the answer this time was no, and it was be ready. And that's exactly what we had to do. We had to bring people together. We had to mobilize firefighters across our state. I helped lead a group of what we called King County Firefighters United, which was a couple hundred of firefighters that were refusing to take the vaccine. And in the end, across the state, we had over 500 firefighters that were part of Washington Firefighters United. And I was one of a few leaders across the state that were able to educate firefighters on what their rights were, the legal ramifications for the fire department. And I believe we probably saved well over 500 jobs across the state just through that, ability to have rallies at the top of Snoqualmie Pass on I-90, down in Olympia at the state capitol, and we're able to get that message out. I end up coordinating with.
Probably not just jobs. I mean, probably lives,
Sure.
because
Sure.
as people are getting information where you could find it. Keep in mind, some people were experimenting with ivermectin or knew about its use, or hydroxychloroquine. And
Yes.
as there's a massive suppression effort to censor that stuff, rational people, especially those that are in emergency services, probably were more familiar with some of these things that have, as far as the efficacy in the studies going back 60, 70 years with no problem, safer than aspirin. You probably saved several people from myocarditis. If you had female employees, perhaps miscarriages, because we saw an uptick, I think, by 4,500%. I mean, these numbers were just egregious. I'm pausing you real quick because we do need to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, I want to continue kind of this testimony that you have, Frank, because at some point you fight the good fight. And the little tease here is that J6 started rearing its ugly head. You had been someone that was there, and there was a shock and awe campaign to make sure that they got their pound of flesh in a way that was probably sought to humiliate you and send a message to other firefighters and police personnel. So I want to get that story when we get back. So, Mr. Producer, take us to commercial.
In every thread, in every stitch, Honor-Bound USA weaves the fabric of the American spirit. It's not just apparel, it's a testament to God, family, and country. At Honor-Bound USA, we're a family of patriots who put our faith, family, and America first. When you visit our website, you'll find a line of products that embody our commitment to pray, stand, speak, and act. As the official site for the Untamed podcast, all of our products proclaim speaking the truth with courage. We also have the powerful documentary from Professor David Clements, Let My People Go. Identify yourself as one of the few who are willing to stand for what they believe in. Join the Honor-Bound USA family today. Wear it as a badge of honor, commitment to the values that shape us, and a pledge to the bright future we will build together. Because when you're honor-bound, you're not just wearing a brand, you're embodying a lifestyle. Do you want to get profits from the world's most productive oil basin? Bloomberg calls the Permian Basin the world's most important growth engine for oil production. Now there's a way for everyday investors to collect monthly checks from an incredible oil hotspot. It's not a stock, and it's not an ETF. Instead, you can actually own royalty rights on over 380,000 acres of prime oil and gas fields. The best part? 95% of all income from this investment gets paid directly to investors like you. You can simply sit back and collect the royalty checks month after month. You can get started with just $25 through any brokerage account. Visit oilboom2025.com to learn more about the opportunity from the Oxford Club's Chief Income Strategist, Mark Lichtenfeld. That's oilboom2025.com to learn how to start collecting Permian Basin oil royalties today.
Welcome back to The Truth Matters with Tina Peters. I'm Dave Clements filling in, and we've got a very, very special guest by the name of Frank Dahlquist. Frank, we gave a bit of a teaser before the commercial break on another part of your story, which is super, super powerful. So from what I can tell, you're fighting the good fight. You're leading folks at local meetings throughout Washington, trying your best to fight. So take us home. What happened, and were you able to prevail against the governor's mandates? You tell us.
Yeah, well, at one point, I'm speaking to about 5,000 people at the state capitol. It was right before the mandate was going to kick in. I had people that were reaching out for help in many different industries. I had nurses that I was talking to. The longshoreman union was calling me to help organize them. Boeing union was helping. Members of their union were asking me for help. as well as many other smaller industries. I'm on the steps of the Capitol, and we're speaking, and it's October 2nd, my 18th wedding anniversary, and I had just got over COVID, a little short of breath still, to be honest. It's amazing how the monoclonal antibodies work so well, where basically it just took the COVID symptoms right out of me in about 12 hours. That's another, suppressed therapeutic, right? But I just knew that in this crowd there was these people. The mandate was going to come in, and I couldn't save their jobs. And unfortunately, the statewide mandate was kicking in, and the federal mandate was kicking in. And as much as we could try to negotiate with our department, with the impacts of the mandate, it wasn't really the governor's fault. It was ultimately the fire chiefs within King County that decided to provide an exemption, which they legally had to do, but then say we couldn't receive an accommodation, even though every firefighter to the south of us in Pierce County were receiving accommodations, and most of them to the north of us were receiving accommodations. And basically, it was just the liberal cities in the state of Washington and then King County around the city of Seattle that weren't receiving accommodations. And so we had brought all the data forward, the real science forward, the numbers that were overwhelmingly. I had a state representative that was giving me breakthrough case numbers that the state was withholding from the public. So I was able to show them tens of thousands of people were having breakthrough cases that they were tracking, but yet, the state wouldn't acknowledge it publicly. And so that was basically the end. The mandate kicked in. The agency said vax or fire. We had the ability to take a 6 month leave of absence, which is what many of us did, hoping that there would be an end to this, as we saw it being temporary. But we weren't terminated because of COVID. We were terminated because of the choices of our fire department. And ultimately, almost immediately, in fact, the day after we were suspended on October 19th, they were already promoting DEI hiring processes and replacing us within the next day.
See, that's the thing that's so shocking, is that early on in your career, you talk and describe about kind of this God-appointed destiny for yourself, where you're receiving downloads, you're able to assist and look at a crime scene in a way that's there's a preternatural aspect to it. And I don't know about you, but as a person that has survived fires, had close run-ins in tough neighborhoods, you want the best. You want the most proficient first responders. And we saw this in the military, the armed forces. Our best soldiers, basically, if they could keep their discernment on what was going on, they were forced out. And so as you're talking, I'm thinking about California. I'm thinking about the recent fires where you have a bunch of DEI hires that replaced more competent people. And there's all kinds of other screwy things about the fires. I just want people to know. I think even Trump hinted on, it looked like the place was hit with something. And so people can read between the lines on what exactly Trump meant by that. But you've got certain burn patterns and things like that just make very little sense. And then you've got the clown show administering relief, where you've got, I think the person that should have been in charge was overseas in Africa or something like that. So there's a similar scenario where it's not just a labor issue. It's not just the fire department making poor decisions. They're actually leaving their constituents and citizens in worse shape in the event that you have an emergency or some type of travesty. So, Frank, did you make them fire you, quote unquote?
Yes. So after the 6 month leave of absence, in fact, we're coming up on the 3-year anniversary now. They officially terminated us after our leave of absence was up. I blew through the vacation that I had. I never take a sick day. I had like 1,600 hours of sick leave, saved up, which, there was no compensation for that. And that's the kind of members that this agency replaced. We had over 190 years of experience lost in one day when they took us off the line. We met that morning coming off and did some prayer. It's a bunch of men and women that decided to leave the agency. In the end, they gave the 2 female firefighters accommodations to keep them on day shift for a short period of time until they became fully vaccinated, it's so hard to get into the fire service that you can't blame some of those people that just said, hey, look, I can't lose my job. We have a member that was former military, one of the strongest firefighters I know, lean and mean. If you wanted somebody to rescue somebody, this would be the person you'd want. But he had a medical issue that he had previous poor responses to other vaccines. So when talking with the agency, he said, hey, look, I can't take this vaccine. The ingredients are the stuff that I have reactions from. They said it's vax fire. That's the policy. This member took the first shot, was sick, was out of work for a month, came back to the line, took the second shot, and never returned. Right now, he's gravely injured. He's out of work, severe migraines. It's like his immune system attacked his body. He is, unfortunately, a shell of what he used to be. And just an amazing stand-up firefighter.
That's happened. That's happened so much. It reminds me right across the street from where I live. I'm a bit of a mixed bag when it comes to what people think of me in my hometown, because a lot of the press that's been written about me, it's closer to home. People can kind of point and whisper, but I needed to get my back adjusted, and I went into this office I hadn't been into before, and he told me that he knew who I was. And here's this guy that's, into holistic health, and he's doing the assessment, and in halfway through the adjustment, he says, hey, I know who you are. And because I was making waves on all the COVID stuff early on, and he says, the biggest regret I've ever made is I took the COVID shot. I knew I shouldn't have done it, but I did it just so I could be around family members. I just succumbed to the pressure. And he looked like he wanted to cry. He says, my health has been taken from me. He's like, I am not the same person that I was. And he just said, you were right. I was wrong. It's like there's this point of like confession, like I was a priest of some kind, where he just needed to get it off his chest. And I've met so many people, and every once in a while you'll have some anomalies where there's a lady that I go to church with, and she does hospice care. She was actually the only deacon that was allowed to go into Memorial Medical Center to, visit people. And that in and of itself was a miracle, because so many people were just dying alone, separated from their families. But she had to take the jab. And so in some ways she still kind of defends that she took it, but I also think that she miraculously was spared. I think that the good Lord knew her heart. It was to go in there and seek the lost. But there's so many stories like what you just shared of, the whole point of the job is security for paying your bills, having a roof over your head, and ultimately having health care and things like that. And the one thing that's devastating that gentleman's life, that's unraveled it all, was taking the jab. Have you ever talked with him since then?
Unfortunately, he's kind of retracted back. He has a really hard time communicating, and so we have one of our members in our group that is kind of a point of contact. Unfortunately, he was separated from the agency. I believe it was last year, and there's just at that point they know there's no chance of him coming back, and they've taken no responsibility in his injuries, even though they're the ones that mandated it, and said that he wouldn't be able to get an accommodation. So he basically had to take it. He's a single father, single dad, again, military veteran. He was just trying to do the right thing. And unfortunately his life has changed. My father-in-law, he was on the heart transplant list in Seattle under the care of doctors at the University of Washington. He was one of the first people that were taken off the transplant list that was made national news, went from Seattle all the way to Fox News. nationally, and he was just one of many that said, "Hey, look, I've done the research. It shows it has issues with cardiac. He's at 40% output on his heart, and he's like, I don't think I should be able to take this." And basically, UW Medicine said it's our policy, and if you're not following our medical direction, we're taking you off the transplant list. And so that's what he did. Many other stories like that as well. That the science was not science. It was obviously propaganda and a push to separate and divide our country. And that's just
So,
the unfortunate thing.
You at some point, I'm assuming, used up all of your vacation, annual leave. You've now been terminated. What happened next?
Well, that's a pretty amazing story too. I was the sole breadwinner for our family. My being a firefighter allowed my wife to be kind of a stay-at-home mom. She homeschooled our kids. We went through a kind of a co-op system as well. And that was just the best choice for us to get our kids out of the indoctrination centers in the state of Washington. And you kind of felt like you were, didn't belong in the state any longer, unfortunately. What I was continuing to do was advocate. We were going to all different types of city council and board meetings around Western Washington. Had many of those boards reverse their decisions and brought their firefighters back. But unfortunately, in that period of time, King County fire departments chose not to bring their firefighters back. Very few even considered it. So the original numbers, we had 200 firefighters on that day were basically terminated in King County. It's an unconceivable number, and we know that it impacted responses in our fire department. They closed down apparatus, and so because of the amazing cost of overtime that it would cost to bring those guys back on over to cover our missed shifts or lost shifts, they were basically closing down apparatus. So we have documented where they weren't able to respond in a timely manner into the city of Seattle as well as outside the city of Seattle. And that was my wife wanted to leave almost immediately and said, we need to move out of the state. And I kind of had been praying on it, and God had just put it on my heart to give it a year. And I had joined another part-time fire department. My heart's in it. It's not about the money. It's about the calling. It's never been a job for me. And so I wanted to get back in the service. And I was going out to a large wildland fire that we had been on for a number of weeks. And I was on night shift. And I got a phone call on the way out. And it was from a fire department in just happened to be where my mom is from in Montana. And basically, I got offered the job to be a fire chief on the 366th day. And I had not prayed about what our future would hold. I just knew God had us in His hands as a family, and we were well prepared for being out of work. And when you pray that God says, "I'm going to give you a year to advocate and try to get your job back and help others," I just couldn't abandon our group. But on the 366th day, when He gives you that job, that's God opening that door.
Yeah.
And so what I like to say is, we have to, as Christians, and if you're not a Christian, this is truly how you have to believe. If you'll celebrate those doors that will open, you have to acknowledge when God closes that door, and just know that another one will open.
So while this is going on, because I know, and I've already told the audiences that you're a J6er. So were you closely monitoring what was happening to the J6 community while you're still fighting the good fight? Because at some point, you're relocated. You got a lovely home right down the street from the fire station. But this new opportunity also presents you with a new dilemma. So walk us through briefly through kind of the J6 experience, and then take us to Montana and what happened next.
Sure. What's during the COVID pandemic, January 6th happened. What we saw in the state of Washington, what was candidate for governor, his last name is Holt. I saw signs all over the state. I was on wildland mobilizations across the state, and even in our own area that is is pretty liberal, we saw cult signs up. And the state was just really pushing back on the governor's office because of his emergency declaration, the closing down of the schools, not wanting to open them back up. He retained his emergency powers for, I can't remember, like 1,500 days or some crazy number. And so there was quite the large pushback during that election. And, in a liberal state of Washington, if you thought it was 51-49, you could have said, okay, it was close, but we're in Democrat state. But it was a blowout. It was like 60 something to 30 something. And we were like, there's just no way that he lost that big. And ultimately, there was Joe Kent down in the south end of Washington that you thought he was in a conservative district, and he lost as well. And it was kind of like, this just doesn't make sense. A lot of chatter around the area. And that's kind of what, kind of led me to kind of just understand something different was going on with the pandemic. And when the day after Joe Biden was named the winner, the day after the election, the vaccine was then approved all of a sudden for emergency use authorization. Like, there's something political about this, right? And my wife and 3 daughters, we had gone to DC before for kind of a history field trip as part of their education a few years prior. And we just decided, we want to bring our kids to DC again and witness what could be a very historical event with a pausing of the electoral college count. And then, having a 10-day investigation. And we just thought, wow, this is the last chance. This could be historical. Why not be that person that's there? And ultimately, my disposition in life has always been, if not me, then who? And so we just, it was always like, hey, I'm going to be the one that stands up. I was our grievance chair for our union for 10 years, fighting for those that didn't have a voice or couldn't speak for themselves. And so this was just one more opportunity to go and witness an historical moment. Had no idea what was going to happen. Was being pre-planned for us that day. Ultimately, the next year, or 2 years, I really didn't think, we were going to be arrested. My whole family was there in that area, and we didn't know we were under investigation. Didn't think anything was going on. And so when the head of the DOJ did an announcement on the 3-year anniversary that they were going to do another sweep of over 1,000 J6 people, a few days later, they showed up at my fire station and arrested me in uniform, and said they were arresting me for my participation in January 6th.
So you're in uniform, you're at the fire station. Were there any conveniently placed press that were there that were able to capture your arrest, or were you afforded some dignity? Because that's kind of shocking, because even if federal agents or law enforcement or sheriff that are being deputized to assist and arrest, there's kind of an unspoken idea that, hey, I thought we were on the same team. We show up and we support. So I just can't imagine someone being able to say, without kind of checking with others, are you guys sure this is right? We're going after Fire Chief Frank. So, to the degree that it's, painful for you, I want people to really truly understand, like, what it felt like to be in your fire station, to have this happen, and give us the play-by-play.
Yeah, it was a normal shift. As the fire chief in a rural fire department in Montana, I was blessed to have a paid position. I was pretty much the only responder for that day. So we have about 20,000 population base in our fire district, and about 1,100 square miles of geographical area. It's one of the largest fire districts in the state of Montana. My assistant chief is the other paid person that's there during the day, and unfortunately, he had been injured, and so he was kind of on light duty. And when the officers showed up that day, they kind of sent somebody in that I had actually talked to earlier, a few months prior, that was interested in volunteering and kind of had a backstory of being with a different agency. And this guy arrived earlier and almost kind of said the same thing, but this was kind of interesting because he kind of wanted to look in my office, and he kind of was looking through the windows. And what I realized, it was, he was an undercover officer that was looking for maybe line of sight, or just see if I knew if they were coming or something. I had my purebred German Shepherd in my office, and so I think that was something that they didn't want to see either. Anyways, and so just a little while later, some officers showed up at the door, rang the doorbell. I walk out like I normally do, just greet them as anybody that needed help or assistance or had questions, and all of a sudden I find myself in handcuffs. Again, totally unexpected, not knowing that I was under investigation. This was just kind of out of the blue, and they announced that they were arresting me for being in DC on January 6th, and and kind of the crazy part is they're recording the arrest via a microphone. And so when my assistant chief kind of looked down the hallway and he was kind of, what's going on? I said, well, they're arresting me for being in Washington, D.C. Well, they actually used that small clip as saying basically that I was admitting to being there, which I was, but it was just funny how they use those little things against you, just the most obscure things.
Wow. What was the effect?
One more thing there, Professor, is that they didn't care, nor did they probably know that I was the only responder for our community that day. I think that was probably the one of the biggest things that I just took back and was just really mad about, was that, they could have came in and said, hey, this is what we're doing, make arrangements, show up, we're going to have a conversation. I have no previous criminal history before. I'm not somebody that is disposed to violence. And yet they left our basic community unprotected and didn't care. And so what I kind of found out was we had 2 FBI agents from the city of Seattle that were pretty much brand new. And the rest, I believe, were from Montana. And I think that's why they cared enough, because when I said, hey, look, I don't want to go to jail and get booked in my uniform. Can I go next door to my house and change? The Montana, I believe Montana FBI agents actually overruled the Seattle guys and said, yes, we're going to go over there. Let them change, get out of uniform.
Yeah, in some ways, you also have to keep in mind the optics on. They don't necessarily want to generate sympathy, because once you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound. So I think you can kind of read that both ways. But in some ways, God was merciful to those men, because if there would have been a fire, I mean, it would have been absolutely divine justice if it was their homes while you're languishing away. So you go through the booking process. How long are you in? So just from the standpoint of getting the fingerprints, the mug shot, what was that like?
Sure. I think the biggest thing was just, how do I get a hold of my wife and let him know that I'm gone? And I had been kind of following and just, hearing some of the other stories from the other J6 impacted people, and just knowing that this might be the last time I will see my kids and my family. Many of those J6ers obviously getting sent off to the Gulag in Washington, D.C., and just experiencing that horrific conditions. I just knew that this might be it. My wife was working at the school district at the time. My dad was able to make contact with her. She was able to come to the house and just kind of see me off, unfortunately. And the FBI said, hey, show up to the prison or to the jail up in Great Falls. He'll be let out this afternoon, and make sure you're up there. Well, I knew that wasn't going to be true. And so I said, hey, don't, I said, with all due respect, to the officers, don't listen to them. And sure enough, it wasn't a week later until I finally got my first hearing in front of the court. So
you were in for a week waiting.
Yeah, I was, I went through the booking process. I never obviously had been through something like that before. I was just very honest with the jailers that were there and courteous, and just said, hey, can you help me out? I have no experience at this. And you're sitting in, a pod with, unfortunately, people with different backgrounds than yourself. And so when I told the jailer, I said, hey, just FYI, this is what's going on. The fire chief of the local fire department. This is probably going to hit the news. Just a heads up. And so I was placed in a regular kind of open area pod with people that were incoming. And that night, middle of the night, the officer came to me and said, hey, get up, wake up. We got to move you. We got a phone call from what sounded like to be outside the jail from, I think he said on high is what he said. You're now what did he say? He said like a special, case here. And I was placed in solitary confinement for my short stay, in the jail there. So.
Okay, so we're going to take our last break of the show, and when we get back, we'll put a bow on all this. And really, you've said it wonderfully, because that's when I met you. Is you were placed on home confinement, where basically you're a prisoner to your home. So we'll be right back after this commercial break.
Hi, I'm Joe, Supreme Leader of DCF Guns. What is DCF Guns, you ask? We're the best damn gun store and range in the universe. Do we have guns? We have all the guns. We got small guns. We got big guns. We even have beastly guns. We offer all types of training, and we have 5 ranges across our 3 locations. I'm a good shot. And of course, we have all types of ammo. We even have flamethrowers! Woo! We offer incredible membership opportunities, and members save even more on guns, ammo, and accessories. Military, both active and retired, and first responders get up to 40% off memberships. Come join the DCF family today, where we keep the range hot and the deals hotter. It's hot.
All right, we're back with Frank Dahlquist, who's just sharing just a heartacheing story from several fronts. But the fact that you're experiencing solitary confinement now, and yeah, we recognize this isn't like 4 years like Jake Lang, but for someone who's factually innocent, that's waited years looking to see if his number is going to get called, to have that unexpected visit, and to know you did nothing wrong. I think this is what people don't realize. It's one thing if you're in a cell and you know why you're there, but you had to have been scratching your head going, all right, Lord, what do you want to do with this? And so take us through the next phase of this journey over the past year, because not only did you get confined at home where we met, you were basically set for trial, and there was a lot of confusion on what was going to happen, whether or not Trump was going to pardon folks. And you were at the crosshairs at the last minute. I think the weekend before the swearing in, we actually almost crossed paths in D.C. So take us through that last bit of this kind of harrowing tale.
Well, again, I'll have to give it back to God. His hand was on my decision making over this past year, and unfortunately, I resigned from my fire chief position. It was just the right thing to do. The agency has to move forward, but now I find myself at home. I've read my initial documents, that they had for the arrest warrant. I just said, "There's nothing here." They accused me of assaulting a couple of police officers, and I'm like, that's not true, and I didn't do that. And the pictures that they showed on the news almost immediately, within probably an hour of my arrest, I realized that this was definitely a campaign against me. As a fire chief, I know this was going to be a high profile case, and so I believe, and this is what my attorneys believe as well, is that the sedition hunters were part of the collective collecting of evidence, and so they had a group that was poised and ready to start making phone calls and making social media posts on our fire department pages and contacting members of our agency within literally hour of my arrest. I mean, it wasn't even publicly known yet. And so you just knew that this was the narrative that was going to be pushed, that an anti-vaccine fire chief was arrested, and that I was hiding out in Montana. Well, I'll have to admit that I do believe that we were political refugees from the state of Washington in our own country. But I definitely wasn't hiding out. I've been very public in Montana here, helping other agencies, not just my own, to get the message out about fire safety, and had done many public news interviews, not hiding my name, not hiding where I worked. And so I just knew that this was, a concerted effort. What I come to find out,
were they drumming up something to create this idea that there was assault on a peace officer? Was there like a false ID? Were they mistaken on a picture where you're kind of in the area? I mean, did you ever get clarity on how in the world they were able to justify that charge in the first place?
So initially, I think we believed that I identified in the area just from the sweep of cell phone data. I believe that was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, that they couldn't just use that geofencing, to ID people that were using their First Amendment rights to protest. I believe my name was then given to the sedition hunters, and sedition hunters then identified me through media interviews into the Seattle area. And then they had my picture. Now, once they had my picture, they were able to, go through their sleuthing and find other pictures in the January 5th and 6th timeframe. What I always found kind of weird when I was there, just knowing situational awareness, part of being a firefighter and then law enforcement training. When I saw people taking pictures of the crowd backwards, wearing their pink filtered masks, I just kind of knew that something was different about those days. Not seeing Antifa around in the area those days as well, just kind of knew that there was something wrong, almost a setup feel as we were there. And so what we ended up finding was that I was under investigation while I was in Washington State. I had my house up for sale. We were currently living in it. And the FBI decided to pose as real estate buyers, contacted a real estate agent, take a tour of my house where they documented searching my house, searching my closets, searching for specific items, trying to tie me back to January 6th. And this was all done without a warrant. This was one of the few documents that I actually received in discovery in the initial documents released to me. Just absolutely incredible. They actually they drove all the way from Seattle out to Montana later, placed a game camera up on a telephone pole just down from my house just to record my driveway and watch me drive out with my
So
fire
let's
SUV.
press pause because I gotta play law professor here, folks.
Yes, sir.
The only people that really had the express authority to let you into their home are the people that have that authority, and that's the owner, perhaps a spouse. The fact that they used a fiction through a real estate reference like that would constitute a invitation that would obviate their need to get a warrant is just disgusting. Because you have to keep in mind that the Fourth Amendment, that's there as a prohibition against the state. Anyone else that's not part of the state, by all means, take a look around the house, and if you want to, purchase it, go for it. That's highly, highly questionable. I don't know if there's ever been a case that I've reviewed that would tell me one way or the other, but it doesn't feel right. Let's just put it that way. So your attorneys are probably sitting there going, okay, I've got a reference point. I've done criminal defense before. How did your attorneys process you being a J6 defendant? Because this is the things that really bothers me, especially in super liberal places, is that I've found that public defenders and defense attorneys will provide absolutely wonderful, zealous advocacy for the rapist, the murderer, the domestic violent offender. But when it came to the J6 defendant, it's almost as if there's like this idea that, which is very bizarre for me because you guys are factually innocent by and large. And if you ever wanted to have your Atticus Finch moment, being the guy that's finally standing on righteous grounds as a defense attorney, here's your opportunity. Here's your opportunity to basically finally have a righteous case. And by and large, the representation that I saw for most J6ers was so reprehensible. What was your experience like? I don't want to suggest that your attorneys fall into this category, but it's also Montana, so this isn't like the inner city. What was your experience like with your criminal defense and kind of ferreting out what you're going to do over the next calendar year?
Sure. Part of the plan was just try to postpone whatever proceedings we might be in front of us, knowing that the election is coming. I wasn't charged initially. In fact, I wasn't indicted for 10 months. And so I sat under the criminal complaint, and the prosecuting attorney out of DC said that I did not have a right to discovery. So they gave us what basically information was in the initial filing documents, but didn't give us full discovery. And so as we got closer to midsummer into the election, they wanted me to take a plea agreement and said, we want you to plead to the felony. We're gonna take off the misdemeanors, and you're looking at an average of somewhere around 60 months. Well, as you know, there's no guarantee to those things. And I spent a lot of time praying. In fact, I have a mountain up behind my house. Went up to the top, prayed for an hour or two to the sunset, and just said, God, just what do you want me to do? And I just decided that I knew God was going to have us, have my family, and that whatever the outcome of this case would be, I just knew that I wanted to spend as much time with my kids as possible. So I turned down that plea agreement and said, I'll take months with my kids and my wife right now, and trading maybe years as their adults later down the road, thinking that I had maybe a year to a year and a half before my trial date would be set. Well, the election came closer, and I believe my judge Howell knew that Trump was going to win, because I got indicted on my 21st wedding anniversary. I believe that was a conspired date as well. And then when I saw Judge Howell for the first time, she said this case is stale, and that we needed to have a date immediately to start trial. And she wanted to set the date that month. And my attorneys said, hey, that's not going to work. We have other cases going on. We're able to push it to the last week of January. And I had a pre-trial hearing before the inauguration, and then a hearing and trial starting the week after inauguration. And that's how close it came to maybe potentially altering the rest of my life. But I knew Trump was going to get elected. I had been praying about it. We just knew that was going to happen, and we knew he was going to do the right thing.
Well, the beauty of this is, if you were going to go through the hell that you went through, and it's hellish for different reasons, because of, I think, just what the fire department, I think, means to most people. Because there's not the same kind of political invective directed towards fire personnel. I mean, it's not quite the same feeling from what you deal with police brutality and things like that. So, for the most part, fire department folks are still held in high regard if you're going to look at the scale of used car salesmen and attorneys at the bottom, and at the top somewhere it's fire personnel. But most J6ers knew that the outcome of the election was going to be determinative on whether conceivably many would never see the light of day again. So when you're talking about those 20-year sentences, and maybe it's not 20 years for you, but 60 months, what have you, couple years locked up, the fact that you had to have had the confidence that if Trump can just get across the finish line, I'm going to be okay. Because, I mean, when they were talking about blanket pardons versus, people that were quote unquote violent because they fought back against the police after being attacked, you obviously weren't in that category. So if you're kind of doing your qualifying list of where someone is, whether or not they're going to be a part of that blanket pardon, I think you were in pretty darn good company. So in some ways, you're just out there for the ride. Even if you go to trial, there's kind of a house money mentality, and your trial was around the same time as Jared Wise. I don't know if you ever got to know Jared, but Jared's a former FBI agent, and he was one of the few trials that was actually undergoing before the inauguration date and after. Where was your confidence level? I mean, how are you feeling? I mean, was there really any anxiety after November 5th?
Well, when that plea agreement came out, it had a lot of language in there that was very inflammatory, prejudicial in nature, calling everybody that was at J6 rioters. That we had all the rioters marched from the ellipse to the Capitol. And in that time, when I was indicating I was not going to take it, there was two threats that the AUSA made. One was if Mr. Dahlquist was not going to take responsibility, that we were going to rescind the offer. And I was like, well, that's you're not giving us any additional discovery. And they said, well, I don't have a right until I'm indicted. That's factually incorrect as well. Mm-hmm. And then the second time when he made another one was, well, if he's not going to take responsibility, then I'm going to go and call the impacted officers, and I'm going to get statements from them. And my attorney is like, you have to take this because, you're not going to get a better deal. And you're looking at potentially a 60-month. And he didn't think Trump was going to get elected at the time. And I said, you're wrong. Trump's going to get elected. I've been praying about it. I just knew I just had peace in my heart. But I said, did you realize what he just said? They don't have statements from the officers. We are almost 4 years into this, and they did not have statements from the officers. So they don't have anything. When you looked at the couple of pictures they did have, you could tell one was augmented automatically. It had a watermark on the bottom. And when they zoomed in and said, look, here's Frank spraying an officer with pepper spray, you could see that it all looked fake. And later on, when I realized that the hand is almost like a G.I. Joe hand, and there wasn't an index finger on the top of the pepper spray, it's like, well, how does orange stuff come out of this thing without something triggering it? You could tell it was fake. And then I realized later that, well, they have me at two places at once. If they have me on the right side of the crowd, how was I on the left side of the crowd assaulting the other officer that they're accusing me of? Well, that body cam that they showed, saying a small clip of it, it did not show me assaulting police officers. It did not show me using pepper spray against them. But when we actually found the actual body cam of the video of the officers around them, what it did show that they got sprayed by their own police officers.
Wow. Well,
never
Frank,
wants to show them spraying me.
It's these encounters that make you want to strangle the attorneys, because the fact that you had the discernment, and it's like, because what you hit on, any attorney worth their salt would have been that what you just said speaks volumes. The fact that they were even considering a prosecution without the quote unquote police report, just so people know that it's part of routine police practice to file your report before you get off a shift that day. So I understand that the circumstances are different, but if you're going to go through the process of raiding people's homes, arresting them at the work site, you better have your police report in hand, because there's got to be a case agent. This is what Frank's indicating on why you're right that they didn't have a case. Typically what happens, you'll find one officer that will try to testify to as many subjects as possible as the quote unquote case agent. You didn't even have what looks like a case agent, because it would be the guy that's actually got the report, and that doesn't exist here. So it's mind-numbing for so many reasons. I know that you probably were looking on with glee after Trump sworn in, because there are mass firings of many of the prosecutors. Was your prosecutor on the list and told to excel elsewhere?
Yeah, I believe my new prosecutor that was being assigned, I believe his last name was Brennan, just did a 60 Minutes interview and indicated that he had been terminated. My primary that his 3-year term of volunteering to go after J6ers was apparently up, but he was staying in an advisory role. I don't believe he has been terminated. But what we find out is that the sedition hunters had a fiduciary interest in creating evidence against J6ers. They only got paid if those cases went to trial. The FBI agents, we've had whistleblowers state that the FBI agents got an incentive, a bonus for having domestic terrorism cases. And the two of mine, when I read the first report and it showed they were 18-month FBI agents, I said, something's wrong with this. And so, they had a fiduciary and incentive as well. And so when you realize that when we went into a system that with almost 100% conviction rate, when we went into a system that I had every single one of my court filings, requests for more discovery motions, every single one was denied by the court, and every single one of the prosecutors were accepted. Those people that were creating the evidence, the FBI agents that were there doing things that were improper, they knew they were going to this system, and they knew that 80% of the people were accepting plea deals. So why not try it? They knew that that there was a high potential that I was just going to plead guilty and go through that process.
It's part of the mill. So we're about out of time, and so I want to just let people know that the fight with Frank Dahlquist just continued. There were lawsuits that were filed related to the COVID stuff, that I know that you have been behind. Perhaps we can bring you on another day to unpack the movement there. But do you have any way for people to reach out and support you? Because obviously your life is still not what it once was. Do you have a Give, Send, Go account or anything that we can direct people to make sure that you continue fighting the good fight?
I don't. God has provided for us so well that we had just had that same level of discernment through the years. My wife and I have prepared for moments like this. This is basically the second time in 3 years that I've been out of work for a year or more, and it's just been incredible that God can allow that and continue to provide for us.
Is there
Here's what.
any restriction for you to resume employment consistent with your calling now that the pardons have been issued?
Well, very difficult. So, obviously, we hold our firefighters and law enforcement to a very high standard, and the amount of news media that covered this locally and as well back in Seattle area was just so overwhelmingly negative that showed just that I was the worst person on earth. That's going to be a long haul for me to recover the damage to my reputation. I was the highest certified firefighter in my fire department out of 130 line firefighters, and I could teach it. Right, I was certified by the state to be a firefighter and fire officer instructor. Those qualifications are hard to come by. Hopefully, that there's an opportunity. I guess that what I'd like to try to point people to is that member that is gravely injured by the vaccine. A single dad, a military veteran, he needs more support than anybody. And if you were to go to or follow KCFF United, King County Firefighters United, on any social media, those are where you're going to get the updates on our pending lawsuits, our fight against our agencies for the vaccine mandate. And we believe there are going to be a Give, Send, Go that will pop up there at some point when he's ready. And that's the person that we'd like to support.
Give that out one more time, please.
KCFF United on any social media.
Okay, folks. So especially for our viewers, because we got them everywhere. If you're in Washington, Montana area, if this is affecting a loved one, maybe you know someone who knows someone, that is a wonderful, wonderful message. Frank, can't thank you enough for your time and your courage. I know that you're not done, but just know that you've got a place here, either at The Truth Matters with Joe Altman, any of the shows that we have as part of the Untamed Nation. And I consider it a privilege to know you and count you as friends. So come back anytime to give us updates on the lawsuit, or just give us an update on if your circumstances do change. I completely understand what you're saying. It's just like being a former law professor. I just it's not worth to employers to even have to deal with, even if they know you're innocent, even if they know that you're a good person, the scrutiny that you take on through the hiring process basically makes it a done deal. And so you and I are on similar journeys on whether or not we can ever get back to what we feel called to do. But you're certainly doing something else that's more important, which is your salt and light through your courage. And I know there's got to be so many J6ers that identify with what you're saying. And more importantly, your story to first responders across the country who had their consciences bound to make an impossible choice. I know that they appreciate your courage. So with that, we will be praying for you. So thankful for you. And Frank, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Professor. Appreciate your time.
All right, folks. That testimony, I'm proud of my fellow countrymen, but at the same time, I'm pissed. I mean, just going through the ups and the downs and just listening to that. This is just one of many, many stories. And we have to tell these stories because there is a caricature and a parroting of lies on who J6ers are. And you heard an example of what J6 looks like. And Frank Dahlquist is a perfect example that these were innocent, entrapped countrymen. And the more that we learn about his case, we can make further arguments for why the commutations for the 14 that should have received pardon are deserving of that pardon. So I'm talking about the Stuart Rhodes of the world, the Enrique Tarrios, these people that have not been restored. So as we hear these stories, take take up the mantle, share Frank's story, because the entire operation was soiled in DC, and we need people restored. So with that, thank you for letting me fill in for Tina Peters, and we'll be back again soon. God bless. Take care.
Hi, Tina Peters here.
See, today they go after you if you're investigating that sort of thing.